Hello and welcome. I am David Schlosser. You can call me David, and welcome to this encore class of reclaiming the discarded image, self, and cosmos from the Middle Ages to today. Um, I know that's a wordy title, and we'll work through today what that means. But let me begin with a few words of introduction about myself, including having to do this video. I'm sorry that we have to start our time together doing this video instead of meeting in person or at least virtually on Zoom. Uh, but the reason is I had an eye surgery a week ago, and the only time that the doctor could see me um, is today on Wednesday during our meeting time. The doctor is out of town in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's I have to go to these eye specialists there, and this was the time that worked out. So I apologize for that. Also, I'll notice it was this eye. If it's a little red, that's why. Um, Also, in terms of who I am a part-time instructor here at Lee University in the Humanities Department, and also at Covenant College on Lookout Mountain. I teach history at Covenant College and Humanities here at Lee University, and that's really my training. I am a historian by training. That's what my graduate degrees are in. I study the sort of the growth of the Christian intellectual tradition, the how and the why of the ways that Christian ideas change over time, and how the ways that Christians thought about their faith was shaped by the times that they lived in, the historical circumstances, and all of those things. So I am a historian by training, but as I do religious and intellectual history, that means that I'm interested in looking at a lot of different kinds of sources: religious sources, theological sources, philosophical sources, literature, these sorts of things. And so, while I do teach history at Covenant College, I also am very much at home in the sort of interdisciplinary studies of a humanities class, and that's what this is. This is a humanities class where we're going to be looking at some pre-modern literature, some medieval and Renaissance literature, um, and as we'll discuss today, that the sort of theoretical framework and critical framework that we'll be using is something that was set forth by C.S. Lewis, who himself was a scholar of pre-modern, that is to say, medieval and Renaissance literature, and that's where this idea of the discarded image comes from. Is the title of a book that we'll be talking about today, and sort of uh, that's going to be giving us the theoretical framework for what we're doing in this class. So, with all of that in mind, let's break this down a little bit. Um, and think about some of these ideas, right? So when we talk about, say, the cosmos, um, what does that mean? What do we think of when we hear that word cosmos? Now, one of the shortcomings of a video like this is usually I would take some time to kind of brainstorm this. We'd write a list up on the board, have some different ideas. Uh, we can't do that. Um, I am grateful for the modern convenience of technology that we can at least do a video like this. But um, so since we can't do it together, maybe we'll just take a minute and I'll pause for a second here, and you can stop the video, maybe jot down a few ideas of what you might think of when you think of the cosmos, what that might mean to you, and I'll wait here for just a minute and let you do that. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to think about that, maybe write down some ideas. The cosmos is a pretty big word, not necessarily in understanding it. We can, but in the idea, what is the cosmos? Well, it's kind of everything, right? And we'll talk in a little bit about some other ideas about exactly what some aspects of that are. Um, each of us having had a chance to have our own ideas about that. But as we think about this idea of this gigantic concept of the cosmos, this thing that consists of everything, right? Not just everything that's made, but even God Himself is the creator of everything. Um, that's a pretty big idea. And the other aspect of this class, right, self and cosmos, is how do we then fit in to that idea? And that's also a tricky question. Maybe look at that list of the things that you had written down for the cosmos. Um, how do we relate to those things? How do we fit into that big picture? And you can pause the video again or take a minute to think about that. Um, but as we'll see today, as we introduce the class and as we go forward, the ways that we think about the cosmos are really going to affect the way we see ourselves, right? We have an image of a puzzle piece here, and it's a blank puzzle piece, and so you could fit that puzzle piece into any number of puzzles, but the ways that you would color that picture, the sort of puzzle that you're trying to put together, is going to change, even if it's the same shaped puzzle piece, right? The way that we think about the world around us is going to affect the ways that we see ourselves relating to that cosmos. And so here are some ideas, and this isn't certainly exhaustive, but here are some ideas of things that might be part of a cosmological framework. Again, there's lots of other things that could be included here, but these are some ideas that I had, right? And as I suggested, you can't have a creation without a creator. So at the very beginning, we begin with God, and then He makes what in the beginning God made the heavens and the earth. Well, a good way maybe to think about that would be the universe, right? All the things of creation. And then the heavens and the earth would include, well, the earth, our planet, but then all the other planets and stars as well. And then you have rational creatures in creation like we humans and like the angels. And on earth you have other creatures like plants and animals, uh, non sentient, maybe like plants, or not rational like other animals, but other creatures, other forms of life. And then among us, we humans, you have human society, the ways that we interact together and form relationship and form societies and communities and all of those things. And then when we're considering the cosmos, a lot of times when people are thinking about the ways that we understand the created order and the creator, is how that universe is governed, right? What are the things that make the cosmos work? Um, and this is something that may be a sub theme of this class. Certainly not the main idea, but especially at the end of the semester, if we have some extra time, we might come back to this idea of the governance of the universe. But I'll mention it a few more times uh, in this video as well. And so we have our modern understanding of the cosmos, right? Here's a modern depiction of the way that we understand the solar system. You have the sun at the center, and then you have the 8 planets, used to be 9. Poor Pluto. Um, and this should look pretty familiar to us. This idea. This is the way that we think about the created order, at least beyond our Earth. And we're going to spend some time today and in this class talking about planets and the heavens and the ways that we on Earth relate to the larger created order. I do want to sort of draw our attention to it, though, because in this sort of theoretical framework that I'm borrowing from C.S. Lewis, um, there's lots of discussions of the what he called the model, the pre-modern understanding of the cosmos, besides things beyond this earth. But I think the most dramatic is the way that the heavens work, the celestial bodies, planets and stars and that kind of thing. And so we're going to sort of use that as one of the prime examples for the things that we're talking about. But certainly that's not the only limit to the things that we're interested in here. But as a sort of dramatic example for the ways that our understanding of the cosmos has shifted, this is going to be our starting point anyway. And so if we look at this uh, modern depiction of the heavens, we notice some things, right? In contrast to what we'll be talking about for the rest of today and the rest of the semester in that old pre-modern model, or the discarded image, as Lewis called it. First of all, we'll notice that the sun is the center of everything, not the Earth. In the pre-Copernican, pre-modern model, the Earth was the center. All of the other heavenly bodies revolved around the Earth, not around the sun. Um, in this modern model, uh, we are not at the center of everything. It's sort of been flipped uh, and turned inside out. So no longer are we at the center, but now the Earth is just one more planet among many revolving around the sun. And the space between, right? We even use that terminology. We call what's out there space. There's nothing there. It's empty, it's void, it's a vacuum, right? You can't live in outer space, at least not without some sort of grounding to earthly things like oxygen, space suits, things that would allow you to live in the way that we understand, right, space today is this sort of black empty emptiness without any life, right? Um, the this is not to say that the heavenly realm, right? The heavens, the space, the created order beyond this world. Um, that's not to say it's not awe-inspiring, right? And it is not to say that we can't be filled with wonder at God's creation, but it's a different sort of wonder, I think, than the sort of model that the pre-moderns used. Right? We understand that the planets revolve around the sun because of gravity, and even if we're not working in some sort of deistic sort of clockmaker view where God just sort of winds up creation and lets it go, we know that He's not continually moving, say, the planet of Jupiter, right? You've got those laws of motion in place, and the planets are going to do what they're supposed to do, right? We have those scientific principles in place. There's a sort of mechanical nature to creation. Um, but we can still wonder, right, at the immensity of space. The even if there's some debates among scholars, if the universe is actually finite or infinite, and maybe neither here nor there. But even if it's a bounded universe, right? The estimates that our scientists are giving us now are so grand, they're so big, the immensity of space is such so large that those numbers are hard to even conceive of, right? Um, and so there is a wonder about that, the intricacies of creation, that God could fine tune a creation so well, so neatly, so orderly, that He could create such beauty among so many different, you know, wonders of space. It is a very awe-inspiring thing. Um, but what I'm trying to get across here is that our modern scientific understanding of the creation is mechanical. It's fixed. It's fine tuned. Um, there's maybe less uh, imagination to it. As we'll talk about today, the pre-modern model was imaginative, and it's not maybe as vibrant or lively, um, or maybe at least in a different way. Again, think of that idea of space versus what we'll be talking about here next as the heavens, right? The people in the pre-modern world certainly did not consider creation or the created order beyond this world to be um, empty, right? It was full of life. It was full of created beings. We'll talk about. It was uh, probably a very vibrant and even a light-filled place, right? This idea of space as dark probably is not the way that they would have thought of it, and so there's a different conception here. So let's talk a little bit about this model that our ancestors, our forebears, people who have come before us, would have considered. And right off the bat here, you can see in this diagram that the sun is not the center, but in fact the Earth is. Um, and the sun was considered to be one of the various celestial spheres. You can see emanating out from around the Earth here are a series of concentric circles called the celestial spheres, starting with the moon. And this is something that maybe we can talk about next week when we meet in person, the sort of boundary between the earth and the heavens, starting with the moon, and then going out with the various known planets of the pre-modern world, and the sun or Sol as the fourth of those celestial spheres. So the sun was just one of an important one, obviously, right? It gives us light, but um, it was considered to be part of just one of the many celestial spheres going around the world. Um, and then you'll also notice that you've got the firmament around the outside, and the PowerPoint here has cut off some of this diagram, and so we're not getting uh, the full sort of complexity and beauty of this. But you've got God as the prime mover around the outside, right? So this is a bounded universe. I mentioned a little bit ago this idea of a finite or an infinite universe, right? This is a bounded universe. This is finite. There is an edge to this. There's an edge to the celestial spheres, and that edge is God, right? God holds this all together, and He's the prime mover, the first mover. He's the one, though unmoved Himself, sets in motion the rest of the movements of creation, right? Creation does its thing because of God. And again, this is a living cosmology. This is a living order between creation and the creator. And we saw in that last diagram God as the outer bound of the created order, right? But he's also something of the spiritual center of this living cosmos. And this is a fresco on the top of a dome in Rome. It rhymes. It didn't mean it to, but and you get the same sort of cosmology set out here, although sort of inverted. And there's something of a paradox here in pre-modern cosmology, where on the one hand, sort of physically, the universe expands and goes out until it reaches the widest possible circle of God as the prime mover, sort of physically, but spiritually, God is this all points back and narrows in and centers in on God. And so this dome here sort of represents that. And again, you have God as the prime mover in the middle, and then he's surrounded by creation, right? Again, you have concentric circles emanating out from the center. And in this case, God is the spiritual center, and the circles emanating out from him. And this is displayed by the sun and the moon and the 6 known planets. So this would include Earth, um, and they are represented with angels. And there's also some representation here of the zodiac signs. So we want to make a couple of comments about this. There are sometimes some concerns about the ways that some of these pre-modern folks maybe would have talked about the planets, the inclusion here of the zodiac signs. This is not astrology necessarily, right? This model that we're talking about uh, was developed or was beginning to be developed anyway before the Christian period. Right? The seeds of this came from Greek and Roman culture and society, Greek and Roman authors, artists, imaginations, and in the late Roman world and through the Middle Ages, Christian society sort of co-opted this and Christianized it, and certainly there are aspects of it like perhaps the zodiac that don't very neatly fit into Christian teaching, but our Christian writers and thinkers and artists of the time, it didn't seem to bother them that much. Or at least they were able to co-opt it in a way that some of those old pagan meanings were set aside. And so you'll see here the sort of personages of the planets are sort of represented here as sort of angelic beings. And that's sort of the sense here in most of the reading that I've done in sort of this understanding in the model is that they're Christianized, and the forces of the planets are more like angels or some sort of angelic governance of the planets. And and certainly there would have been discussions of astrology. Christians through the ages have distanced themselves from astrology and saying that the stars and the heavens, the celestial bodies, don't determine fate or fortune or the sort of destinies of mankind. I don't think that's what this visual representation is supposed to represent. And again, I'm trained as a historian, not as a artist or art historian or anything like that. But um, the way that I understand this is more a representation of the created order, the cosmos. And the thing that we want to get across here is that in the pre-modern world, that understanding of the cosmos was a living thing. It was a dynamic thing, right? The planets were not just rocks or gaseous bodies that revolved around the sun, but but had personalities. They had they had characteristics. And yes, even some of those themes and characteristics and personalities could influence aspects of daily life here on Earth, right? This is a interactive, this is a dynamic, this is an ongoing mutual engagement in creation. Again, not in a sort of deterministic or astrological way, um, but hopefully, in a sense, I'm making clear that people in the pre-modern world saw creation as a very vibrant, living, dynamic place to be. And so this is also very imaginative. world in which to live, an imaginative cosmology in which to position yourself. Um, Not to say that they lived in a different world or a different reality, but they thought of themselves interacting with creation differently than we did. And this is kind of an important point, right? That because the way that we understand the cosmos, the way that we imagine our relationship to everything else is something of the heart, right? This is not an analytical scheme. It's not a scientific scheme. The first diagram that I'd showed you was published in the 1560s. This is several decades after Copernicus had published his findings posthumously of a heliocentric or sun-centered solar system, right? Lewis points out in his book, The Discarded Image, that even after Copernicus and Galileo, and there's lots of good new evidence to suggest that the Earth isn't the center of the universe, people were still thinking and talking and writing in terms of as if the Earth were still the center. And a book that we'll talk about in a little bit, and one we'll return to towards the end of our semester, is John Milton's Paradise Lost. And Milton is living 100 years after Copernicus, had personally met Galileo, and there are hints of a more modern cosmology in Milton, but there's a whole bunch of the pre-modern sort of model as well, that we'll be looking at as well. And so this is of the heart, right? It's not being convinced intellectually of this is the way the world works, but it's an imaginative scheme. It's a fanciful, not in an untrue necessarily way, but the way that we fancy, I guess I mean, where we fit into the cosmos, and it speaks more to the heart than to the head. And then, as I mentioned, one of the things that people are interested in thinking about cosmology is how is it governed. And again, just as I mentioned, in our modern cosmology, we have Newtonian physics, we have Einsteinian physics. There are laws that nature and creation are supposed to sort of adhere to, and that's the way that the created order works. Even if we do have a personal and loving God sort of overseeing that and making sure that it all goes according to His will. Again, in this living, dynamic, pre-modern model, it's not just God overseeing it all. Although, as we saw, He is the prime mover, right? Everything gets its start from Him. And then there are layers of governance, fate and fortune and chance, right? The ways that humans relate to God, all of those things are going to play into a much more sort of, again, living and dynamic and vibrant, governed cosmos than maybe we're used to thinking of today. All right. So let's talk about some of the books that we'll be using in this class. There'll be 3 pieces of literature that we'll be looking at from the pre-modern world that bear this model out in some important ways. And the first of these is The Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius. Now, this is an important book, and Boethius was an important author that people later in the Middle Ages and the modern world went back to and looked at Boethius, and his use of the model, this cosmological model, was very influential on readers and writers and thinkers that came after him. Um, there's a lot more to this book than just the things that we're going to be interested, sort of resonating with this cosmological model for our purposes in this class, and that's going to be true of all of these books, right? All of these books have a whole lot going on in them, and they can be studied in their own right for all of these different things. We just want to pull out some of the relevant passages and ideas connected to the things that we're talking about this semester. This is the image that I have here is the Penguin edition. Is a good edition. I've got it on my bookshelves. It's not the one that we're going to be using, but I do like this image because it has, you can see in the background, this wheel, and that has something to say about this idea of the way that the cosmos is governed. This is a passage that we'll look at in a few weeks about fortune, and in the sense of sort of luck or good or bad chance. And this is an image. Again, Boethius is really influential in a lot of different ways. And this idea of wheel, fortune and her wheel, is really going to play into writers for centuries to come, right? When they think about fortune and chance and good or bad luck, they'll have this sort of image in mind. And so this cover is a good example of that. And there'll be some other things that we'll talk about as we get into that book. The second text that we'll look at is from Dante's Divine Comedy, and we'll probably spend most of our time in the first volume of the Inferno, but there's certainly relevant material in the second and third volumes, the Purgatorio and Paradiso as well. But I like this diagram here, this sort of map. If you're not familiar with Dante's Divine Comedy, it is an allegory. It's a fiction. He puts himself into the story and sort of pretends that he goes on this journey through the afterlife, first through hell and then through purgatory and finally up into heaven. This is a good diagram. I like this, showing that journey first through hell, through the center of the earth, in concentric circles. And as we've been seeing, this pre-modern model relied heavily on the idea of concentric circles, and then up through more concentric circles, winding around, spiraling around Mount Purgatory, and then finally up into the heavens through the celestial spheres, and then finally up into the Empyrean and to the heaven of heavens, where God himself resides. I like this diagram for a number of reasons. It shows the concentric circles. It shows sort of the even on the globe itself, the pre-modern understanding of the ways that the Earth would have functioned or looked. You can see that the top part, actually the southern hemisphere, was considered to be uninhabitable and just water. It shows the concentric circles of the heavens, and you can see that same sort of scheme of the way that the celestial spheres were ordered, going out from the earth. But the other thing that I really like about this diagram is it shows that sort of paradoxical inversion, right? It shows going outward first, farther and farther away from the earth as the center, but then inverting that and then centering all of a sudden back together in the oneness of God, right? And that God sort of spiritually, in this sort of blessed afterlife of heaven, right, where ultimate happiness is found, is in that singularity oneness of God. And so you have in the series of concentric circles both a going out and a going in. And in preparing this PowerPoint, this is the first time I've actually come across this diagram, but I really do like the way that it conveys that idea and it gets it across very well. Um, so again, the Divine Comedy is huge, just like Boethius. There's you could, and we have a faculty member here at Lee who does uh, take a whole semester to go through the Divine Comedy with students. You could spend a whole semester just on this one work. Um, that's not what we're doing. We're just going to pick out a few relevant passages to do. Um, and then the same with Paradise Lost from John Milton. Again, there's lots going on in Paradise Lost. There's a lot more that we could talk about other than just the sort of cosmological um, ramifications here. You'll notice in this diagram the sort of mapping of Milton's cosmos, a bunch of circles again. These are not concentric, but you still have this sort of circular nature of the cosmos, including heaven or the Empyrean, the abode of God. Um, and Milton, as I've suggested, is interesting because he's sort of on that borderline. There are some kind of modern elements that he will have picked up by the 1600s, but really relying a lot on those pre-modern elements. And I would say on balance, Paradise Lost tends more towards that pre-modern model rather than the modern model as well. And we'll talk about that as we get into that text. All of these books, because there's so much going on, and because we're jumping centuries as we go from one to the other, sometimes many centuries. There's a lot going on in between. Uh, some of us may have some familiarity with these texts, but others of us may not. So we'll plan to spend a couple of weeks on each one, and spend some significant time at first sort of setting each one up, giving some historical context, trying to understand exactly what each of the books is trying to do. And then in the second week, narrowing down a little bit more into some of the relevant passages that have to do with the theme of this class. So that's kind of the plan. Those are the three works that we'll be looking at from this sort of medieval and Renaissance literature. These are certainly not exhaustive. There's lots of other authors and text and examples that would pull these ideas out. And this framework that I've been using comes from Lewis's book, The Discarded Image. You can see here. And these three pre-modern books that I've just gone through form a good basis of his argument. There's, as I said, he uses a lot of other authors as well, not just strictly those three. But these three are some of the three that both I'm most familiar with, and not just most familiar with, but are more interested in. I think they have some more interesting things to say than some of the other examples he uses. So that's sort of where our focus is going to be. But Lewis sets out explicitly what this model is in The Discarded Image, right? That's where this theoretical framework comes from. And in your reading packets that will be available to you soon, I've included the chapter from this book on the heavens. And he talks, as I said, there's a lot of other things that he talks about in this book. He talks about sort of the makeup of the earth, the relation of humans to animals. He spends a significant time talking about, sort of heavenly beings, that is to say, spiritual beings, angels, and demons, and that kind of thing, and how they fit into the cosmos. I think for our purposes, some of those things may not have as much weight, and so I'm not including those passages in your booklet, but you could go back and look at those in this book if you wanted to. we're not going to be reading any of Lewis's space trilogy, although we certainly could have. Um, this is a work of fiction, or three works of fiction, where C.S. Lewis uses this pre-modern cosmology um, sort of implicitly, right? He set it out explicitly in that scholarly work, The Discarded Image. Um, that was one of the few um, academic works that he did, and was relatively well received. Um, this is a work of fiction. It's a piece of literature. He doesn't explicitly say this is what he's doing. He doesn't tell us I am incorporating pre-modern ideas of the universe to talk about a science fiction story. You kind of have uh, to know that explicitly. You would have to read The Discarded Image as well, um, but certainly the elements are there, right? Certainly, this attitude that we've been talking about towards the created order and our relationship to it is part and parcel of this space journey that Lewis takes us on through the space trilogy. Um, it is here, it is in this work that Lewis uses the sort of language that I've been using today, and not in The Discarded Image, where he draws this distinction between our modern conception of space as this empty black vacuum without life, whereas the heavens in the space trilogy, drawn upon this pre-modern model, are full of life, right? They're full of angels and angels who are singing. Think of the scriptural passage, "The heavens declare the glory of the Lord," right? That's not the way that when we think of space, we don't think of the stars giving audible voice, praising God. Now, maybe in their beauty and their grandeur, they might point us to worship God, but the psalmist says, with their voice, they sing praises, and you get that sense as the hero of this story travels through space. He also talks about space as not dark, but light, full of light. Again, a very different conception of beyond this earth than we think of. The planets have personalities and characteristics and influences in the ways that the pre-modern model would have. Mars, right? The word where we get Mars was the pagan god of wars, where we get the word martial, right? If someone has a sort of martial attitude, they have a militaristic attitude. The sort of spirit of the planet Mars in this book echoes some aspects of that old personage of Mars. The same with Venus. Some of the other planets sort of show up in the last book a little bit at the end. You get sort of some of their personalities as well, some of their influences. Again, this is not astrology. Lewis is not um, condoning or preaching um, or hearkening to any sort of astrological idea. But he's drawing on this imaginative idea of the ways that the created order fit together. And again, he doesn't explicitly say this in the space trilogy, but implicitly, and especially if I mean, you feel it, and that's kind of an important thing here. Lewis is going for the feeling of the model without really telling you that's what he's doing, and even more so, he does that. Perhaps we'll argue, we'll talk about with his Chronicles of Narnia, his most famous works. Um, we'll not be reading the Chronicles of Narnia themselves, but we'll be referencing them through this work, Planet Narnia, by Michael Ward. Michael Ward actually came to Lee a few years ago. Perhaps some of you had a chance to hear him speak on the subject. Um, but Michael Ward argued, and he was the first one to do this, for some 60 years scholars of C.S. Lewis looked at the Chronicles of Narnia and sort of threw up their hands and said, we don't know what to do with this, right? Because there's 7 books, and the only thing that really holds them together is the character of Aslan the lion. Some of them are more allegorical than others. The main characters are not the same main characters in all 7 books. There's sort of an ebb and flow to that. The themes of them are very different. There didn't really seem to be a cohesive structure to the Chronicles of Narnia, and scholars up until only 10 or 15 years ago really didn't know how to make sense of that. And so Michael Ward came along and argued that actually Lewis is doing here in a very much more subtle and unstated way than even in the Space Trilogy. He's applying this pre-modern model to the 7 Chronicles of Narnia, and each of the 7 books has the sort of themes and characteristics and influences of the 7 celestial spheres. So the sun and the moon and the 5 known planets. There'd be 6 if you included the Earth, but the 5 other planets, right? So the sun and moon and 5 planets, seven celestial spheres, 7 books. And he argues that each of those books goes along with one of the celestial spheres. Now, again, Lewis never says this explicitly. He never wrote it down. He never told anybody. And so there's some reading between the lines here. And not everybody is going to read the Chronicles of Narnia the same way that Michael Ward does. I think that it makes sense to me, but we understand that he's doing some interpretive work here. But in any case, that will be the way that the last book that we use in this class will be some passages from Planet Narnia to see how a modern Christian thinker, right, someone influential in Christian circles, imaginatively use the ideas of the past to tell new stories. And so that's kind of what we're interested here in this class. And so let me end with sort of clarifying a little bit about what it is we are and aren't doing. And we'll start with the things that we're not doing. And so at this point, this should be pretty clear, but just so that everybody's on the same page. I do understand that the title of this class is hard to get these big ideas that I've talked about over the last 40 minutes or so into a succinct title, right? It's hard to say, we're going to talk about the way that pre-modern people thought about the cosmos and how we do it differently and how maybe we might learn from that. That's what Reclaiming the Discarded Image, Cosmos and Self from the Middle Ages to today is supposed to be about. I know when we talk about the self, it might sound, or identity, relationships might sound psychological. You probably have a sense that that's not what this is about. Neither, for as much as I've been talking about space and the planets and that kind of thing, this is not a science class either, right? I'm not a scientist. My wife is. My wife teaches over in the chemistry department here at Lee. And we have talked about in the future perhaps doing this class together jointly, where I present these sorts of ideas from the humanities side and she presents the sort of earth and space aspects of this. That is, down the road. We're not doing that yet. But neither is this unscientific, right? Again, this is not astrology. We're not here to point out the influences of the heavenly bodies and to say that our future is going to be such and such and it is predetermined to be one thing or another because a certain heavenly body is in a certain aspect of the sky. This is not what we're doing, right? It's not what we're interested in. I don't think that's what, as I've said, I don't think that's what C.S. Lewis was interested in. I don't think that's what these pre-modern authors were interested in. And neither is it unscientific in the sense that in looking at this model or looking at how it appeared in medieval and Renaissance literature, We're not saying that the Earth is the center of the universe, right? We're not saying that the planets actually have some sort of personality. Um, our scientific data suggests otherwise. Um, Nor are we trying to be anachronistic and to say that pre-modern people had a better understanding of the cosmos than we do now. I'm not rejecting modern science. I'm not rejecting modern uh, understandings of the cosmos. Um, I'm not suggesting that one view is different than the other, but I do think that it's helpful to understand that there is a difference, right? We do place ourselves differently in relationship to the rest of creation and to the creator based on the way that we understand everything else around us. And as we read older text, it's helpful to see that difference, right? Um, this work, The Discarded Image, an introduction to medieval and Renaissance literature. One of the reasons that C.S. Lewis did this, it was based on a series of lectures, right? This was his beginning place, right? This was an introduction. If you're going to understand Boethius or Dante or Chaucer or Milton or any of these other writers, right? It's you're going to miss a whole lot if you don't understand the way that they're considering themselves fitting into the cosmos. And so we want to understand that difference, right? We want to be able to understand the difference. I see that uh, I changed the slide at the last minute and it cut off the word understand in a very funny way. So I apologize for that. But in understanding this model, then we can go back and as we're reading various aspects of um, uh, pre-modern literature, pre-modern art, understanding the past that has come before us. If we don't know where these people are coming from, if we don't understand the way they thought of themselves, uh, then the messages that they're telling us are going to be obscured as well. Uh, we want to be able to appreciate those differences, and then as we appreciate those differences, and again, this is without having to adopt that cosmology ourselves. We don't have to say yes, Dante, yes, Boethius, you're right. This is a Neoplatonic concentric circle living dynamic cosmos. We again, we don't have to give up our modern science, but uh, it might deepen our understanding of our place in the universe if we consider, well, maybe there are other ways to do this. Maybe other folks have thought about this differently. What does it mean for the heavens to declare the glory of the Lord? Um, what does it mean for us to interact with each other and with other animals and um, think of our relationship to God in this created order? In considering the ways that we order our own position in the cosmos can help us understand the ways that we relate to others as well, and including God too. So that is what we're trying to do, and um, I will be giving out either by email if that's your preference, or I will have hard copies on campus in the Encore office. You can pick them up there. Um, Hopefully by the end of this week. I'd meant to do it today, and today was worked all day getting this video done, so I apologize for that. But I am working on your handouts, and you'll be getting those soon. Uh, and that is what this class is about. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and I look forward to being with us all in person very soon. Hopefully next week. So I hope you have a wonderful week, and we will see you soon.